All right, so what we're going to look at next is paper clutter, and I know several of you mentioned it. So True Wealth gave you a handout, and it's very similar to my handout with how long to keep things. So I want you to take all the handouts home, but do look at, for now, my handout, because I just wanted to point out on the bottom is a list of what should be in a safe deposit box or a fireproof safe. I find that most of my clients do not have either one of those, and their documents are floating around their house. I mean, if there was any kind of fire or flood, I mean, we don't have floods often here, but can you imagine all the places in the country that do have fires and floods, and all their, all their paper would be gone. All their, their passports might be gone, their social security cards might be gone. So I do recommend that if that's not something that you have, that's an action item you take from today. So conquering paper clutter. So the nice thing to know, and someone had mentioned going paperless, but the nice thing to know is only 20% of what we file is ever referenced again anyway. So really think about what you want to keep. And so obviously there's financial documents that True Wealth has listed and that I've listed that you do need to keep. And there's lots related to tax purposes. But I wanted to just touch on just a few of those things. So as I mentioned, I do 60% paper because even though we're sort of headed for a paperless society, I don't see it because paper keeps coming into our homes and businesses. So if you can see this, the files on the left, they're multicolors. You couldn't read the labels, and it was very hard to find. There were lots of internal folders on the left. On the right is a file system that I did, and since I've started doing this, I've started making the font bigger because I realized once I hit 50, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Can't read. I might not be able to read that. So you want really nice big labels on your files. You want a color that's maybe not army green. If you're going to file, just make it a little bit pleasant. Okay, so so this client wanted blue. I usually pick someone's favorite color. I don't often color code because that is just another step. I mean, if you enjoy filing, then yes, start color coding. Financial could be green and medical could be red. But I just like to make it easy. Most of it's alphabetical. Most of it's by category, well, most of it's by A to Z, but I do like to have people's medical all together. I'll point out two things here if you can see it. So all the tabs are on the left. And so what's interesting about filing is it started, I mean, years and years ago, in a business setting. And so they did teach people how to do files. And they said, well, you should have them alternated and, left, right, center, left, right, center, and that kind of thing. Well, that adds a whole nother layer of complication because then some people are like, I have 2 left and 1 right, And so for some people, it really bothers them. But anyway, so I like to do just down the center because if they're in alphabetical order, you'll know that the B's probably are somewhere around here and the Z's are probably somewhere at the back. So it usually doesn't bother people that it's, that you can't see every label, the minute you open the drawer, but you'll know where they are. The other thing for home files, so this is a good tip to make them real easy. If you are creating a new file system and need to punch up your file system, is I don't use internal folders. So internal folders are here, it bulks it up, it takes a lot more room. But I don't use internal folders because, again, the files were created for a business setting and you would be taking your folder with you to meetings, right? And then you'll put it back in the slot. Well, at home, all you're doing is opening the drawer and dropping your paper in. That's what you want. You want it so easy. Open the drawer, and drop your paper in. Now, if your files are so full that you can't even get your hand in there to drop, see that a lot, to drop the paper in, then that's just frustrating and you're not going to want to do it at all. So with the human nature, it's the path of least resistance. So we want it free-flowing, right? So who knew someone could get so excited about files? I mean, I really like doing the files. So you want them free-flowing, you want it really clear. And you want to be able, ideally, you want your paperwork to be that, you're not at home, but you're standing in your tax office and you can call someone at home and say, can you pull up that paper? It's in my file drawer. It's the right-hand drawer and it's labeled it's labeled True Wealth. Can you just pull that out for me? Because wouldn't that be great to be able to find all your papers in 15 seconds or less? So it's possible with a good system. And I have to tell you, one of the things that I see a lot is people are putting their files not in a file drawer or not in a file box. So like this one lady was using a baby changing table And then it had a drawer in there, so she just had them stacked in there. But she thought, here is an empty space, and I will put my files in there, which didn't really make any sense, but she didn't understand that. She just thought, she just heard she needed a home for them. So that was the home she chose. I also see a lot of important paperwork in garages, which are not, you know, there's humidity out there. If you have any paper or photos in your garage, you'll want to get them out. They will not live well there. It'll attract bugs, lots of bugs in papers in garages. And then the photos will stick together, because you want to, if it's worth storing correctly. And that's for your stuff too. Okay, so if you have stuff in a, we'll do the stuff later. We do the stuff later. But if it's worth keeping, it's worth protecting, and it's worth storing well, right? If it's a memento, again, we'll get that. Okay, don't get me started on that yet, right? All right, save any document that would be difficult or impossible to replace. Again, you've got the whole list here. I will mention that almost none of my clients are saving utility bills. Okay, so you could save them for a year. I actually do, because I don't mind paper and I have a place for it. But you know, these companies have redundancy in their networks. But when it comes to money, when it comes to your investment accounts, oh, I definitely want paper proof of those. I definitely want to see that. So even though a lot of the investment firms are not sending that, you could print it out once a quarter. You could print something out if you want to prove, you know, anything that you want to prove, right? That I owned that, that's my account. I don't rely on the other companies to have redundant networks for me. I want to ensure that Wells Fargo has this much in the bank and I have this on paper, right? All right, so it is kind of personal though, because I have my clients in my 30s, they're keeping almost nothing, which is so interesting to me. All right, so going paperless. So I'm going to skip to this. So when I first started doing this 13 years ago, most families, we would have 4 file drawers. And so if you want to get as close to streamline as possible, I recommend 2 file drawers. One for your current, which is like medical and contracts, like your termite contract, you know, things that you need for a home. Again, some of the bills that are listed on your sheets here. And then you need one that's a tax archive. So, I mean, it could be in a storage box too, but I'm just saying one complete either file drawer or file bin of papers. But this is this couple in their 30s that I just worked with that they have no paper, which is interesting. They also have no technology except their phones. So, you know, again, seeing the way people live is a fun part of my job. But we got them down to 1 box. And so that was like, oh, this is a good test for my speaking engagement. How, you know, if someone wants to keep the minimal amount of stuff, how much room would it take? It was 1 file drawer. I couldn't get it any less, and they agreed with me. They're like, you're right. We're going to have to keep these medical records. We're going to have to keep some of these statements, and then they had a tax drawer too. Yes, yes.
Do you have any suggestion? Like I've got files because I have a password to that file.
Okay.
And so I'll have a file for it. You know, is there anything you could suggest about, because I've got a lot of different ones, different passwords that I went with.
So your question is, what's the best way to keep passwords?
Yeah, passwords. If you don't want to keep all the folder for it, how do you keep them?
Sure. So, I mean, I like to use an address book because it's alphabetical order, or you could use one of those old Rolodexes, right? I know I still have one. So it's just something that's in alphabetical order that'll make you pull up, because we have so many passwords these days. So, I mean, each person, I think they're saying, has 75 passwords or something like that. So, you know, an address book, and then you just keep it hidden. You know, you don't want to leave it out, but you know, especially if you're in an office setting. Did that answer your question? Okay. All right. Great. And then the last thing on here is auto deduction or online bill pay. So if you don't want the paper, so you can, first of all, stop the actual paper from coming on some of your bills, but then you can also, and you can pay it online. But what I like to suggest for most of my clients is, if they feel comfortable, to auto deduct. So literally have it come out of your, I used to have it come out of my bank, have some things come out of my bank, and now I've decided my credit card's better because I've got that 2 layers of protection. I can complain to the company and I can complain to the credit card company. But I've had my utilities on auto deduct for over 20 years, and I've never had 1 mistake. So that's about at least 4 accounts that I don't have to pay. I don't have to do anything. I don't have, so I can, you know, I can travel, and the only things I have to worry about are my credit card statements. But almost everything else is auto deduct. So it's just something to consider. in productivity-wise that will save you a lot of time if you feel comfortable with that. And let's go with one more on paper, and then I'll just take a few questions, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the stuff in our homes. So organizing action paperwork. So action paperwork, of course, anything you actually need to do something about. And so the main categories that I see in people's homes, and everyone has them, is to pay, to do, and then to file. And then the last thing is like I have an events folder, events email folder. I have an events folder at home for actual tickets. Actual tickets or actual invitations that people send me. And then the last one would be a folder. So it's basically creating a folder, and this is a desktop file box. I found that so many kitchens are covered up with paper. So it's like, they scoop up the paper every time that you have to eat, and they scoop up the paper on the dining room table every Thanksgiving, right? That's what we do, and I see that all the time and everywhere. And so what's interesting is in this, I think it was in the 70s, is that they started putting a desk in the kitchen, right? Had a desk in the kitchen. And now and a lot of my clients are renovating, there's no desk in the kitchen anymore, but guess what? There's still paper in there. So with some people, if it works, doesn't work with everybody, but we have a desktop file. They have cute ones at the Container Store, and we just have these 5 or 6 folders, so you can at least get it off the counter and put it somewhere. But the whole thing, so this is part of a system, okay? Organizing is homes for everything and a system for everything. So if you don't have a system for actually doing your action items, then this won't work. This is simply just another container that you're trying again, right? That you're trying harder to get it under control. But the system should be, for your bills, would be to put it on the calendar, what day you're going to pay the bills. Or decide on a TV show. A lot of my clients like this, they're like, okay, before my favorite show, I'm going to sit down in the living room with my bills, and I'm going to, and even if the show's taped, this is like, I started this before everything was DVR'd, right? So, so before my favorite show, I'm going to work for an hour on my bills because I hate doing my bills, but I want to get them done. So then it'll be a reward for me. Anything it takes to create a game to make you do stuff that you don't want to do, because we all have more exciting things to do than doing our bills, right, and going through our paperwork. So that to pay, you can put the bills in the box, put the bills in a folder, file drawer, or tray, okay, whatever you want to use, but then put it on your calendar of when you're actually going to do it, what's your system. The next one is to do, and I said not urgent, don't put the urgent in there, because if it's urgent, that means like today or tomorrow. So if you have 1 or 2 urgent things out on the counter, that's okay, because you're going to see it, right? The next one's to file. So a lot of people have their main filing cabinet upstairs. So how do things make it from the kitchen all the way upstairs? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. A lot of times I'll see like a paper trail all the way in homes, all the way from the kitchen to the upstairs office. Like it doesn't quite make it there. And so when that happens, then I know it's not working. So if it's not working for you, what you want to do is you want to look. So one thing that I did, and for a couple of my clients, they have storage items that are file boxes. So in the living room, I actually have an ottoman, and that's where my the main papers that come into my life, all the bills and everything like that, the car records, or it's hidden in this ottoman. So just make it easy, like hide it wherever it's convenient for you. It doesn't have to be this official file cabinet upstairs. I mean, maybe that's where your taxes are, but if you're going to have to file often, like figure out how to get it into the kitchen. I made one of the cabinets, this fit in one of my cabinets too, so when a company came over, if I didn't even want this out on the counter, I'd just hide it. But then when the company leaves, then you get it back out. You got to get it back out. Okay, so again, those garage paper clients, that's what they would do when I said, how'd you get 20 boxes of paper in your garage? And they would say, well, every time someone came over, we'd scoop it up and put it in the garage, and they never brought it back. Okay, so that's an extreme that maybe some of you, again, meeting you right where you are. So if that's where you are, there's hope. There's hope, because we got all 20 boxes out of this garage. We found passports, we found birth certificates, we found security cards, that kind of thing. All right, so the last one is school, volunteer, job, house projects. So be generous with your file folders. So if you have this big kitchen renovation going on, make a folder for it and put all the paperwork that goes in it. Or if you have taken some school classes or kids, you could make a school file for each child. The volunteer jobs, I think people underestimate, okay, volunteer jobs are a lot of work. So make some files for it. Make an email folder for it. Make a snail mail folder for it. Let me see if there's anything else I had for that. So again, so with paper, you're physically organizing it, but then you also need a system. Okay, so maybe you have a system, but you don't have homes for things, or you have homes for things, but you never had a system. And a system, it doesn't have to be brain surgery. It's like, like the one client, she said, okay, it's 7 p.m. Before I sit down and watch my favorite show, I'm going to do the bills. That's when I'm going to do them. That's her system. Like it's just one decision of, this is what I'm going to do. Yes, this is what I'm going to do. And then write it on your calendar, set your phone timer, whatever you need to do to make that happen. If it doesn't happen that day, you just set your timer for the next day at the same time or something like that. And I think that is all. So that is all with paper. Do you have any questions about that? And again, I'll be around after if there's any specific questions, or if you want to talk about getting the gumption of having 25 years of paperwork that's in your attic, how do you get that out? I can tell you that. We can talk about that. We'll talk about that because it's not that uncommon. Any questions about paper?
Do you have a favorite shredding service?
Oh, that's a good question. Do I have a favorite shredding service? So what I use, yeah, or
I mean, if it's so much and you don't want to bring
if it's so much, I've used a couple. One's called A1 Shredding. The question is the favorite shredding service. A1 Shredding, and then Eco Shredding. And so they just pay by the box. Usually you would have maybe more than 5 boxes. But it's great because the boxes get heavy. So yeah, so I've had someone out to do about 25 boxes that were in someone's attic. Now I still peeked through all of them. Okay, I want to make sure. You want to make sure that what's in there is what you think is in there, right? But yes, good question. Yes?
A fire pit.
Do you have
A fire pit! Hey, that's a good idea. I've never heard of that. Hey, that works. That works. Right, that she burns hers. Okay, yes?
I don't know if you're going to get to this, but how about all those owner's manuals to your appliances, all your yard equipment, all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so the question is for the manuals, what do you do with all the manuals, the warranties, that kind of thing? I have most clients not keep, well, probably half and half. I have half the people not keeping any of them because they said, if I need it, I'll find it online, okay? Or you could call the company at the very least. Or the other half, I usually just create a box, just a plastic box. It's about yay high, and just lop them in there, because what mostly I've seen is that there's manuals in every room in the house, right? And if you're, and especially in the kitchen. So some people will, like when they move in, there's a box of all the manuals that the people were so nice to leave you from the previous owners, but I kept finding them in the kitchen, like a whole drawer just dedicated to the manuals. And then finally my assistant and I were like, wait a minute, this was here when they moved in. They didn't choose to put these here, right? Because I would always ask, I'm like, why are these in the kitchen? You don't need them in the kitchen. Anyway, so just because it lived there when you first moved in doesn't mean it has to stay there. And that's another organizing tip. So just because there's shelves already in your garage doesn't mean they work. Doesn't mean that that's what you need in there, right? Maybe one more paper question? Okay. All right, we're good.